For most of human history, we were not alone. If you could travel back 50,000 years, you would find a planet where several different kinds of humans existed at the same time. Some looked a great deal like us. Others were built in completely different ways, shorter, heavier, shaped by climates and landscapes that would break a modern person in days. One species lived on a remote island and evolved to stand barely 3 feet tall. Another is so mysterious that nearly everything we know about them comes from a single finger bone. And then there was us, Homo sapiens. Today, we are the only human species left on Earth. Not because we were the strongest, or the smartest, or the ones who had been here the longest. Simply the ones who are still here, which raises a question that does not have a clean or comfortable answer. What actually happened to everyone else? What happened was slower and messier than most people imagine. To understand how it all played out, you have to begin with the species that lasted the longest of all. Homo erectus. Homo erectus appeared around 2 million years ago. To put that number in any kind of real perspective, consider this. Everything modern humans have ever accomplished, every city built, every war fought, every language ever spoken, fits inside the last few thousand years. Homo erectus walked this planet for a stretch of time so vast that our entire recorded history looks like a footnote beside theirs. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably human. Long legs, shorter arms, a frame built for covering ground on foot. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa and push into other parts of the world, which means they figured out how to survive in environments they had never evolved for. A remarkable achievement by any measure. Their brains were smaller than ours, but significantly larger than anything that had come before them. They developed stone tools that barely changed across hundreds of thousands of years. That can sound like a failure of imagination, but it is actually something closer to the opposite. What they made worked so reliably that there was simply no pressure to change it. But by their final chapter, the world had moved on without them. Their last populations became stranded on the island of Java in Indonesia, cut off from the mainland, with nowhere new to go. The forests they had always hunted began to shrink. The animals they depended on grew harder to find. Without enough people or enough space to recover, a species that had endured for close to 2 million years slowly ran out of options. Their last known fossils date to around 110,000 years ago. After outlasting everything the planet had ever thrown at them, Homo erectus was gone. Now let us talk about the Neanderthals, almost certainly the most misunderstood species in all of human history. For decades, they were dismissed as dim, brutish cave dwellers. That image was always wrong, and the more we learn about them, the more wrong it becomes. Neanderthals were built for survival in ways that are genuinely difficult to overstate. Compact and powerful bodies, wide chests, thick bones, strong arms. Their faces featured heavy brow ridges and large nasal passages, designed to warm cold air before it ever reached their lungs. Their brains were on average slightly larger than ours. They hunted large, dangerous animals at close range, which is why their skeletons show injury patterns remarkably similar to those of modern rodeo riders. They controlled fire, crafted sophisticated tools, and there is growing evidence they buried their dead with genuine care. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for more than 300,000 years. But around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into the same regions. For a period of several thousand years, both species shared the same landscapes, and DNA evidence confirms they had children together. But living alongside Homo sapiens created new pressures the Neanderthals had never faced before. Both species hunted many of the same animals and depended on the same land. Homo sapiens lived in larger groups and maintained wider social networks, allowing them to share resources, knowledge, and support across far greater distances. Neanderthals, by contrast, generally lived in smaller and more isolated communities, which made it harder to recover from difficult stretches. At the same time, the climate kept shifting, cold periods and warmer periods constantly reshaping the landscape and thinning out available food. Neanderthal populations became smaller and more fragmented, and their DNA shows very low genetic diversity, a clear sign their numbers were already in serious decline. By around 40,000 years ago, they had disappeared from the fossil record entirely, not erased by a single dramatic event, but worn down over time by a combination of competition, climate pressure, and populations too small and too isolated to hold on. Now the Denisovans, and this is where the story becomes genuinely strange. This species was different from every other on this list, because we can barely see them at all. The entire discovery began with a single finger bone pulled from a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, a fragment so small it could rest in the palm of your hand. But when scientists extracted DNA from it, the results matched nothing. Not Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, not anything previously known to science. It was an entirely new branch of the human family, one that had been hiding in the genetic record all along, completely invisible until that moment. Since that first discovery, only a handful of additional remains have surfaced. Some teeth, a piece of jawbone found high on the Tibetan plateau, and very little else. And yet their genetic shadow is enormous. Denisovan ancestry turns up in modern populations scattered across parts of Asia and Oceania. Some Melanesian groups carry as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetans inherited a specific Denisovan gene that allows them to function at extreme altitudes where most people's bodies would begin to fail. A species we can barely locate in the archaeological record is still actively shaping how living humans survive in thin mountain air today. As a living population, though, the Denisovans faded out somewhere around 30,000 years ago. Their range may have been vast, but their numbers were likely always thin. And thin populations rarely hold on when the world starts shifting beneath them. And then there is one of the strangest chapters in this entire story. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers discovered the remains of a human species unlike anything ever seen before. They stood roughly a meter tall and had brains about the size of a grapefruit. Initial skepticism was fierce. Many scientists argued the bones belonged to modern humans with a disease or developmental disorder. But as more evidence emerged, it became clear these were the remains of a completely separate species, Homo floresiensis, a tiny human that shared its island with Komodo dragons, giant storks, and dwarf elephants. Islands push evolution in unusual directions. When a species is isolated long enough, dramatic changes can follow. Large animals shrink, small animals grow. Homo floresiensis may be one of the most remarkable examples of this process anywhere in the human family tree. Their fossils date from roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, and stone tools suggest they may have persisted until around 50,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans were arriving in the region. What happened next is unknown, but on a small island, a small population facing new pressures does not need a catastrophe to disappear. Sometimes it simply runs out of time. So why are we the only human species left? The obvious answer is intelligence, but that explanation falls apart almost immediately. Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans adapted to some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Homo erectus outlasted us many times over. Homo floresiensis survived conditions that would be genuinely terrifying to a modern person. Intelligence alone does not explain it. What may have actually set Homo sapiens apart was something harder to measure precisely: the way we built and maintained connections across distance. We did not just live in groups. We built networks. Tools, techniques, and knowledge moved between communities at a speed and scale that does not appear to have happened for other species in the same way. When one group faced a crisis, what they had learned had often already traveled to others. It did not die with them. When the climate shifted and entire regions became unlivable, our species had the flexibility to reorganize, to adapt, to draw on knowledge that had come from somewhere else entirely. We were not locked into any single place or any single strategy, but even that explanation only covers part of it. Geography mattered, timing mattered. Being in the right place with enough numbers at the right moment mattered. We were not destined to be the last ones standing. We just happened to be. The other human species were not early versions of us. They were not stepping stones on the road to becoming Homo sapiens. They were their own kinds of humans, each with a distinct way of surviving, each shaped by a different relationship with the world around them. Homo erectus endured for close to 2 million years and still disappeared. Neanderthals survived hundreds of thousands of years of brutal Ice Age climate and still vanished. The Denisovans left behind almost no physical trace at all, yet fragments of their DNA still live inside people walking the earth today. For the vast majority of human history, we were one branch among several in a much larger and more varied family. Now, For reasons that are still not fully understood, we are the only branch left.